Hey folks, it's mid-August and I am woefully behind on my summer reading and I think it's time to catch up. So I have this book that I bought earlier this year. I bought it for my son. He begged me for it because we saw this guy on YouTube giving a brief history of Ketchup, and then we saw that this Andrew F. Smith, had written a book. So I ordered it, of course, and noticed that it is in fact published by a university press. It's published by the University of South Carolina Press, and if you've been here before, you know that I focus on this channel exclusively on books published by independent presses and university presses. So it was perfect. It was like it was meant to be. And I've been saving this book to read in the summer because what is more evocative of an American summer than Ketchup, of course. I've been saving it, but haven't actually gotten to it yet, and I need to start reading it. Summer is almost over, and not only have I not yet read this book, I also realized I have this entire stack of books that I specifically picked to read during summer for various reasons that I have yet to read as well. I am going to read this book about ketchup, and then I'm going to eat some ketchup. I might also make some ketchup because this isn't just a history of ketchup. It also includes a ton of historical recipes for all sorts of different ketchups. Did you know that ketchup wasn't initially made with tomatoes? No. There are so many recipes in here for, like, the page I just turned to is 4 different recipes for oyster ketchup. And then also celery ketchup and peach ketchup. I might not make oyster ketchup, but I'm gonna maybe make some ketchup and I'll bring you along. And meanwhile, I'm also going to try to read through all of these other summer books, which are all from independent publishers, of course. First up is The Wishing Pool and Other Stories by Tananarive Due, and this is published by Akashic Books, and these are horror short stories. Horror just seems like a particularly summery genre, especially when pool is literally in the title. We also have Summer Will Show by Sylvia Townsend Warner, and this is published by New York Review Books. This apparently starts out with a very tragic premise that I won't share here, not to spoil anything. Death-related premise set up for this book, which isn't particularly summery, but summer is in the title. So, and then we have Direct Sunlight, which is short stories from Christine Sneed, and this is published by Triquarterly Books, which is the publisher of Northwestern University. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Direct Sunlight, that's, sounds like summer here in Chicago, lots of sunlight. We have another Chicago-based press. This is Gunmetal Blue by Joseph G. Peterson, and that's published by Tortoise Books, which is located in Chicago. And I don't know, the red, white, and blue cover, gun in the title, it just kind of screams American summer to me somehow. So we're gonna read this. Then we have The Hot Beat by Robert Silverberg, and this is published by Hard Case Crime. This is a crime novel that was originally written in 1960 by a well-known science fiction author who turned to crime in the 60s to bring in a little extra cash. I thought this might be a good Garbogist pick, actually, because part of the point of Garbogist, right, is that it's fiction written specifically with making money in mind. And that's what Robert Silverberg was doing. There was a period of time when science fiction wasn't making any money anymore. And so he turned to writing crime, and because he needed to make a living before he returned eventually back to science fiction when it started to become popular again. It takes place in LA, and it features a famous clarinet down on his luck who's been accused of murder. And then finally, I have To the Lake by Jana Wagner, and it's translated by Maria Wiltshire, and this is published by Deep Vellum. And I picked this purely on the title alone. This was originally published in 2011, but just brought to the US by Deep Vellum this summer. I spend a lot of time on the lake going to the lake in the summertime. So hence, where's the title? I must read to the lake, even though I think this takes place in winter in Russia. I think I'm going to start things off with the wishing pool. I don't know, it's just really calling to me right now. I think it's supposed to thunderstorm later today, so I think it would be a great time to start reading this horror short story book during a thunderstorm. We gotta catch up. Hello again. I am still in the middle of the wishing pool. I'm really savoring these stories, even though I still need to work hard to catch up on my summer reading. Speaking of ketchup, I have been reading Pure Ketchup, A History of America's National Condiment. When I started reading this book, I knew it was meant to be because the first scene starts in Illinois. It starts in this little town, Collinsville, Illinois, Route 159, a 70-foot steel ketchup bottle stands atop a 100-foot tower. It was from Brooks Food, which was an Illinois-based company that made a tomato ketchup. So ketchup, I learned from this book, actually originated in Asia. It's not 100% clear where exactly ketchup originated or even where the name ketchup originated, but it's thought to be probably in China. It had nothing to do with tomatoes. It was more of like a fermented fish sauce and soy sauce. And then in the 17th century, European traders and sailors encountered these fish and soy sauces in Southeast Asia, and they loved them. And so they tried to bring them back to Europe, but they didn't have the same kind of ingredients there. Like especially, they didn't have soy, for example. So they started just using like whatever was available, like anchovies and walnuts and mushrooms were used to create this ketchup. Soon there were all sorts of ingredients that people were using to create what really was a category of sauce that was called ketchup. So you had different fruit ketchups, and you had fish ketchups and bean ketchups and nut ketchups and just all of these different types of sauces. And they were often made with lots and lots of different spices and vinegars. And one of the key features of these ketchups was that they kept for a really long time. So you make them when the produce is bountiful after harvest, and then they can store for a really long time. And then people would use them to flavor foods, especially during the winter, and to enhance more complex sauces. And they were especially used to put on food that might not be the freshest. There were enough spices and vinegar in these ketchups that it would hide any like off flavors in food that was possibly on the edge of spoiling. And then tomato ketchup didn't become really big until the 19th century. There seemed to be like early recipes for tomato ketchup in the 18th century, but it started to become really popular in the US in the 19th century, and eventually over time became the most popular type of ketchup. And it's a really, really fascinating history of how tomato ketchup came to be the most popular type of ketchup, and then also how tomato ketchup and other ketchups went from being a sauce made in home kitchens to a condiment that was mass produced in factories. And then the book also talks about how mass production of tomato ketchup changed the product entirely from what it had been when it was made in home kitchens. So it was much sweeter because they were using way more sugar. It had a brighter color eventually. It started to become the more bright red, and also it completely lost its actual tomato flavor. But taste changed over time, especially American palates wanted that sweet condiment, and so it just became the popular ketchup that we know today. And then there's the whole history of all the companies that were making ketchup. And there's even a huge long list in the back of pages and pages just listing companies that made ketchup. And the rise of Heinz in the early 20th century is really due to their aggressive investment in advertising, so that now Heinz is really the ketchup you mostly think of when you go pick up a bottle from the grocery store. But the most interesting and most valuable part of this book is the listing of historical recipes of all these different kinds of ketchups. Overall, it is a great history, kind of academic, but still very readable. Like half of each chapter is taken up by citations. But if you are, for whatever reason, interested in the history of ketchup, I very much recommend this book. It was written in 1996, so I imagine there's more updates since then. It was a long time ago, but still super fascinating. I am heading to Michigan for a few days, and I'm gonna bring a few books with me. We're gonna hang out at the pool, maybe go to the beach. We're gonna go blueberry picking. I think I'm gonna take the wishing pool and finish that up there with me. And then I'm also gonna take gunmetal blue. And when I get back, I'm going to try my hand at making some of these ketchups in this book. So I'll see you there. Finished this collection of short stories called The Wishing Pool and Other Stories by Tanana Reeve Dew. This is published by Akashic Books. And I loved these. I don't read a lot of horror. I'm really compelled by the idea of horror. I think horror can do a lot of really cool diving into human nature that a lot of other genres can't do in the same way. So I want to be more of a reader of horror, but I'm also a big wimp. So I'm not a big wimp, I'm a little bit of a wimp. It's divided into 4 sections, and one of the sections actually is all stories that somehow have to do with one town in Florida called Gracetown. So either the stories are set in Gracetown or the characters have family back in Gracetown, somehow tied to this one town that is just a little bit different, has a little bit of something supernatural. And then the last 2 sections were both like post-apocalyptic stories. The 3rd section was just 2 stories, I believe, and it focused on one particular character at 2 different points in the post-apocalypse. And then the last section was a kind of a different, just a grouping of other post-apocalyptic stories. Those were my favorite sections, I think, maybe. I really love post-apocalyptic stuff, so I thought those were absolutely fantastic. Every single story had amazing characters with amazing backstories, amazing setups for the story, had a lot of heart, really compelling plots and stories, and wonderful settings, and they were all really, really entertaining, but also had a lot of depth with ethical issues having to do with race and family and love and life and death. There was one story that did have one detail that really was really gross and fantastic horror detail. I won't spoil what it was, but I will say that I did enjoy that kind of grosser horror detail. So, interesting. Well, highly recommend this very entertaining but also really thoughtful collection of stories. I'm just out here drinking my coffee, eating some of my grandma's famous kuchen coffee cake. My dad and my kiddo made a couple batches of it while we've been here. I also recently finished Gunmetal Blue by Joseph Peterson, and this is published by Tortoise Books in Chicago. And I picked this up because I was at a fair in Chicago and Tortoise Books had a tent and a table, and this was recommended to me. When I read the back, I was like, oh, this is a detective novel. And the guy was like, it's kind of an anti-detective novel. I was like, okay, well, that sounds still like a detective novel. Anyway, I picked it up, and it is very much an anti-detective novel. It's about this private eye. He doesn't really have any work. He doesn't actually detect anything. He's a detective, but he doesn't do anything. He decided he wanted to be a private detective when he lost another job. He was laid off from another job, and he was too old to do much of anything else or learn much of anything else. So he kind of just becomes a private detective, and then kind of decides that he didn't maybe really want to do that. After all, it wasn't as fun as it seemed. When the book opens, his wife has died 5 years before, and he's still deeply, deeply, deeply grieving her. She died in a very violent way. You don't know who killed her in the beginning of the novel. This guy is just in deep grief. He doesn't really do his job. He is estranged from his daughter. He visits with his friend a lot, and they go to the shooting range. He has a relationship with another woman he met in the cemetery who is also really messed up. The style is it's very much all in his head. It's either dialogue, short dialogue with no quotation marks, kind of woven in with the rest of the text, or it's in his head. There's not a lot of description of setting or anything like that. It's very much in this guy's head, and he's kind of losing it. This is actually very much about guns, and as I was reading it, he spends a ton of time in the shooting range with his friend, and at one point he's given a gun and all this stuff. There is a letter there's a note from the author at the end that says was very much inspired from a place of guns are out of control in our country. They're just causing so much horror and destruction and pain for families. It's interesting. I'm really glad that I picked this up. This is unlike anything I've really ever read, and I think that's the beauty of small presses is they publish books that are unique. You won't necessarily find anywhere else. This was a very good read. Hopefully people will be up soon to join me for breakfast. I'm kind of just out here on the porch by myself in the morning and have my coffee and my kuchen. We're on vacation today. We just got back from school supply shopping, and I thought I would try to make one of these old-timey ketchups. I'm gonna make mushroom ketchup, and there are 10 recipes for different mushroom ketchups in this book. So I'm kind of combining elements of all of these different mushroom ketchups, and we'll see. They're all fairly similar. They have similar spices and elements, and they all start the same way. So they all start with salting the mushrooms. Most of the recipes say salt them overnight. These have been sitting for 2 days now in the fridge. We got some good liquid going on. There's some mushrooms mashed up in there. All right, so we have to simmer that with some chopped onion, some lemon zest. I'm gonna do allspice. Well, not that allspice. I'm gonna do whole allspice, whole cloves, and whole peppercorns. I'm also gonna add some vinegar too, some apple cider vinegar. So we are going to use the trusty Le Creuset to make some mushroom ketchup. Yeah, that smells so good. I also think I'm gonna make one of the fruit ketchups, and there is a recipe for a plum ketchup and for a cherry ketchup. And I have these old plums that weren't very sweet, so we didn't really eat them. Then we also have some of our delicious Michigan cherries that I thought I would combine the plum recipe and the cherry recipe to make a fruity ketchup. So I'm gonna add cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and peppercorns. And I think, even though neither of the recipes call for it, I'm gonna use up the rest of the little bits of lemon zest. Both recipes call for vinegar. as well. Oops, I need my sugar. Let's see. Oh yes. So we've been back from Michigan for a few days now. When we got back, I made a couple of ketchups, which you would have seen. They ended up really liquidy because I did not incorporate the solids back into the liquid because I didn't want to get out the blender or the food processor. So I just kept the solids and the liquids separate and figured I could still use them in different ways. They were delicious. The mushroom ketchup, it was salty and just had different spices. It just was so savory and amazing and so flavorful. My husband, when he tasted it, he said, "This kind of reminds me of a fish sauce," which blew my mind because that was what the 17th century sailors were trying to replicate, was the fish sauce they had encountered, and they were trying to replicate that back in England by using mushrooms. Blew my mind that that was the first thing out of his mouth. We used it on steak and it was freaking delicious. We went specifically out and bought a steak just for this mushroom sauce. But I think the next use will be on polenta, and we'll use both the sauce, the liquidy sauce, and the mushrooms themselves on some polenta. The cherry plum sauce was also so good. My family, my husband and my son, said it tasted like Christmas. I drizzled it over waffles, homemade waffles. I woke up one morning and my husband was making waffles, which was just like Christmas. And it also has this vinegary kick to it. So I actually think it would be amazing as a shrub, right? Actually, it might actually be a shrub, right? Because that's vinegar and fruit. And that's like what this is, vinegar and fruit and spices. So is it a shrub? Is it just a shrub? So I want to make a drink with it at some point. I'll put it in some LaCroix or something and have my ketchup shrub drink. We are headed back to Michigan actually, and I'm gonna bring some more books with me. I'm gonna bring Summer Will Show because I have to finish this in the summer because summer is in the title. I'll also bring Direct Sunlight by Christine Sneed. It should be fun. We are gonna again spend time at the pool and the beach and go on lots and lots of golf cart rides, which is my favorite thing to do. You can ride golf carts around their little community. So the best thing ever.
Okay guys, we're back again with watching on the golf cart. Alright, so we went for a little drive. Look how beautiful that is. Oh my goodness, I don't remember that. So there's a creek right there. It's kind of foresty. So we're driving down to the beach. Later, or in a later episode, we're gonna get a lot of good footage there. But basically that's where we're going. But this is going to be kind of a shorter episode of this time. Okay guys, we're at the beach. We're finally at the beach to get some really amazing footage.
Okay.
Ready?
What are we doing?
We're pouring ketchup into the bowls. So the rest of our family doesn't know about all this ketchup. And
perfect. Okay.
Ta-da.
Ta-da. We're gonna take one of these.
Yeah, take one of these,
and
or dip it in the ketchup.
Dip it. Okay.
Hey, I want some. Then you use your pencil to write on them.
And what are we writing down?
We're writing down how all the places that we set up all the ketchups of how good they are.
Okay.
Are you still voting?
I have a burger.
Oh, you don't have burgers?
Hello, we're back in Chicago. We had our ketchup tasting, which you saw, but I have to admit something to you. We actually did a second tasting. Not only did we not film the second tasting, but the winner of the tasting was in the second tasting. And worst of all, you can no longer purchase the winner of our ketchup tasting, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyway. So Smucker's has a company store in Orrville, Ohio, and my grandparents like to go there. And one time they went and they saw that Smucker's had these jars of ketchup, and so they bought some and they tried it and they loved it. So they went back and they bought a case, and then they went back again and they got a case for my parents. And so my parents have been working through this case of Smucker's ketchup. Of this case that my parents have, they had one jar left. And so the day after we did our tasting, I pulled that jar out of the fridge and I said, okay, we're gonna do another tasting. So I did the Smucker's and I added just a regular old Heinz. And so we did another tasting with Smucker's and Heinz, and the Smucker's won. Smucker's was the winner overall of all the ketchups we had tasted. Smucker's was the best. So my mom texted my grandma and said, yay, the Smucker's ketchup won our tasting. And my grandma wrote back, don't get too excited, they stopped making it. So I'm pretty sure we finished off what was possibly the last jar of Smucker's ketchup in existence. What are you gonna do? But it was really delicious. It was, it has a much deeper, like, tomato-y flavor than like your regular Heinz, a little thicker. It comes in a jar, so you have to spoon it out of the jar. But that's okay, because we enjoyed all of the other ketchups we tasted. The runner-up to the Smucker's was a brand called 78 that I had never actually seen before. It's more like Heinz. It's more flavorful than Heinz, and we all really liked it. But we actually liked all of the ketchups that we tasted. So one of my personal favorites was the country ketchup from Stonewall Kitchen, because that tasted like, if you've ever made homemade ketchup before, it tasted like that. It's really heavy on the spices. It was still kind of chunky with vegetables in it. So you can serve it like with a spoon. And I thought that was really delicious. Again, it was really, really heavy on the spices. And I had it on a ham sandwich the next day and it was amazing. But then the Portland ketchup was also really, really good. And we even liked the Heinz Chipotle ketchup. We thought that was pretty fun, but we were struggling to think of how you would use it, and we were thinking it might be good in baked beans or something. And then we were out and about and shopping in all the little towns along Lake Michigan. I found 3 more ketchups. So I bought them. We didn't taste them. We're saving them for next time that we go. We were a little ketchuped out. I'll report back. That won't be in this video, but if anybody cares, I'll let everybody know if we have a new winner. So that's the report out on the tomato ketchup. But how am I doing on the book reading ketchup? I finished Summer Will Show. This is my 4th book of Sylvia Townsend Warner's that I've read. So I've also read Lolly Willows and The Corner That Held Them. Those are both novels. And I've also read a collection of stories called The Kingdoms of Elfin. Kingdoms of Elfin still remains my very, very favorite of the 4 books of hers that I've read, but I think this might be a second runner-up, though it's kind of a 3-way tie possibly between all of the novels that I've read of hers. So this was published in 1936. I think it actually was her 4th novel that she wrote. So it's written in 1936, but it's set in 1848. And it follows a woman named Sophia Willoughby. She is an Englishwoman and a member of the landed gentry in England. I don't want to give too much away, but something really, really, really very tragic happens in the beginning of the novel. It tells you in the blurb, like if you read a description of this book, you'll probably see what it is, but I don't want to spoil it just in case. I was still, as I was reading it, even though I knew it was going to happen, a part of me was like hoping that it wouldn't happen somehow. Something really tragic happens that causes Sophia to go seek out her estranged husband. They had been living apart, and so she goes to seek out her estranged husband, who is living with his mistress in Paris. So Sophia goes on this journey to Paris, and it's February 1848, and she just so happens to get to Paris on the eve of revolution. So she's there to confront her husband and his mistress. She arrives at the mistress's house on the night that the fighting starts in Paris, in the streets of Paris. And her life takes a wildly unexpected turn from that night on. This is a deeply feminist novel. It is elegant and witty and clever and sharp, like all of Sylvia Townsend Warner's writing. Something on every page just kind of blows your mind, like some insight or some quip or some description. And it's full of all these complex and nuanced themes of political revolution, gender roles, and class. But there's also a really big issue with this novel to mention for today's readers, and that is the use of racist language and dehumanizing characterization of some of the characters. First, there's the treatment of Sophia's young cousin, who's named Casper. He's just a child in the beginning of the novel, and he is mixed race. Casper is characterized in ways that would not be okay today, nor have they ever been okay. And secondly, there is a lot of anti-Semitism that is expressed by characters throughout the novel. It is full of stereotypes that made me really uncomfortable while reading it. And I think a lot of readers, especially white readers, I would guess, would say, it's of its time. That's language that was used at the time. But that's an uncomfortable excuse for me, because actually that was never an okay use of language. I feel like I'm in a really uncomfortable position with this book, partly because I'm not really sure if what was reflected here was if we were supposed to see Sophia's point of view, and we as readers were supposed to disagree with how she is treating her family and friends, or if what's seeping through is really how Sylvia Townsend Warner saw other people. It's hard to tell, because I do really feel that we are supposed to disapprove of and criticize the way Sophia is especially treating her cousin Casper. I do think that we are not supposed to feel like that's okay, but it's not made perfectly overtly clear, so it's hard to say. It's hard for me to reconcile the incredible feminist power of this book with the racist approach to its characters, including Casper and Mina, who starts out as the mistress of Sophia's husband. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts if you've read this book or others that have a similar issue in your eyes. So next up, I am going to take to the lake. I'm going into the office tomorrow, and I'm going to read this on my lunch hour sitting by the lake, and I will take you with me, and I'll see you there. Okay, so I did not read really any of To the Lake at the Lake. It was way too windy. Valiant effort. I am gonna wrap things up. So I managed to finish 4 books. I am still working on 3, but I have high hopes that these will all be finished before summer is officially over. Direct Sunlight impressions so far, these are great stories. They feature great characters, all in really interesting situations. There's a lot of family dynamics and interpersonal dramas. They're really all about relationships at their core, and that's the best kind of short story, I think, that it boils down to a particular pivotal moment in a relationship. I think those are my favorite kind of short stories. My favorite so far is a story called Where Do You Last Remember Holding It? This is a story that is about a mother and her 2 adult daughters. And the mother has dementia, and one of the daughters has been tasked with primary caregiver responsibilities, while the other daughter is infuriatingly not helpful at all. And so it is pretty much from the perspective of the daughter who is the caregiver, and this new role. She's very young. She's just graduated from college, and this new role she finds herself in. And it was a beautiful short story. I loved it. So I'm really enjoying and savoring these stories. The Hot Beat is something else. This is a story about a clarinet player, famous clarinet player who, again, this was written in 1960. So this famous clarinet player was hot, he was hot stuff for a while, rising fame, and then he basically blows it. He becomes addicted to alcohol and living a rough life, and he has been accused of murdering a young woman. And this is the story of a couple people who kind of don't believe he was the one who could have committed this murder, and so they're trying to figure out who actually did it. I'm almost done. I'm not almost done. I still have this chunk left, but we've found out who the killer is. I'm pretty sure we found out who the killer is, and it's exactly who I thought it was, which is totally fine. There are a lot of bouncing bosoms in this book, so not exactly my usual pick, but very entertaining. Perfect Garbagist pick. And then finally, I can't tell you anything about To the Lake other than it is about a flu pandemic. It was written in 2011, so long before COVID. Flu epidemic, pandemic in Russia. This family is fleeing the city and heading to a lake to try and save themselves, trying to escape. That is all I know. Apparently it is now a Netflix series, though I haven't seen it. And I think this is my first Deep Vellum book. They're a publisher that I have really, really admired their work from afar, and I'm excited to dive into more of the fiction that they publish. Deep Vellum is based in Dallas, Texas. I am looking forward to getting to know them a little bit better. Believe it or not, I actually have more corny titled reading vlogs planned for you for the future. So please feel free to roll your eyes as you hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Sarah, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. Everybody ready?
Okay. Ready.
Why are you wasting that much ketchup?
For the cloud.